Alrighty, so here we are. It's the spectacular Silver Age. I'm super pumped to get into this one. I got a little bit of feedback on the last videos. Everybody seems to like them. I have to put a little less effort in there. But they did say to put some more effort into my wardrobe, so there you go. I got a little more in style. It gives me an excuse to show off my hats too, because if I'm talking about the Silver Age, there's this thing I covered in the Golden Age. I didn't go into Batman as much as I would have liked to. So I'm really going to explore some of the history and the lore of Batman as the Silver Age is when he's really already established. All the rogues are there by now, and he's doing a lot of the fun antics that the Silver Age makes him have to do, which is, pretty interesting and pretty funny to look at. But there's a lot of other stuff going on in the Silver Age, and one of it is we're going to make mine Marvel. Because Marvel Comics shows up, and they really do a big, big thing for comics. They make a difference by making superheroes have problems. As the old expression goes, here, superheroes with problems. Because they're more like people. They're not these gods among men, which is a lot of what the DC Comics characters were. The stories were not about Clark Kent because Clark Kent is the disguise, right? Whereas, and this is all pre-crisis, this is all early, where that is all of that is retconned later when we get to the 80s, and we'll talk about that. But right now, it is kind of the Superman that you may know from the film, where his parents die early when he's young, and then he moves away from Kansas and Smallville and all that. So that's one of the main things about Superman that changes, is that's a big deal. So the thing about the Marvel comics is they introduce this where it's just people. It's men and women that just radiation. Now I've got superpowers. Not I'm an alien. I'm an Amazon. I'm from Atlantis. All of that stuff is not as relatable as the Marvel superheroes end up being. So we're going to talk all about that, and we're even going to get in. We're going to dive into some of the main characters, obviously, from the Avengers that you know, because you remember Captain America is a fine, fine example of what this entire project's about. So I'm really excited to go into that. And there's a lot of other stuff having to do with the Silver Age. I've got my trusty notes. You got to take notes when you're looking at things, right? So the thing about the Silver Age also is that everything in this age, it's a lot of convenience is the goal, and it's the atomic age. We're coming out of the war, and the whole thing about that is that, remember, comics have changed. Superheroes start to dwindle on out as adults are more interested and people coming back from the army are more interested in maybe more adult themes, romance comics, things of that nature, even some war stories. And the superheroes they end up getting pretty censored because something horrible happens, and we'll get to that in a little bit too. But first, let's just explore some of the 50s. And then what I really do want to focus on in this video is I'm going to focus more on DC, I think, because then we'll go into Marvel as it comes a little bit later. Because right now, DC is a powerhouse. They just are a powerhouse at this time. They really do own the whole industry. Again, the titans of superheroes right there: Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. And then in the Silver Age, one of the very first characters of the Silver Age, now there's a little bit of a debate, I've always thought it's a different person, but people signal that the Flash is really like the first Silver Age character. But really there's another argument that is Martian Manhunter, who debuted about a year before. So Martian Manhunter in the DC Universe shows up about a year prior to the Flash, and it's a big deal, and it starts this whole lore about Mars in the DC Universe. But then Flash is just such a hit, which I think is what it is. And that's what makes the Flash stand out, as like, this is one of the turning points of the Silver Age, is we're going to introduce these characters. And the way these characters are introduced, again, is a great example of what this class is. It's evolution, both out here in the real world and over there inside of, I think, Earth 1, the DC continuity, but the DC Comics universe. Because that's some of the things that you're going to see, both with Captain America, where the Golden Age does get involved, but they use real time. Real time has passed. And this is always something comics do, and then they retcon to kind of bring things up to date, because there's always a war to put Ben Grimm in. You just put him in the most recent war, and that's, the way they redo these characters. So, that is some of the thing that happens a little bit later when they just change the way characters are based on company decisions, based on moving forward with just a new era of the way comics are produced and popularity. So Captain America is brought back, but in the storyline, right, he's in a block of ice. They say, where have you been all these years? I've been trapped in ice. And it makes this big, big thing. But we'll talk more about that with Marvel. He's just a great example of this for the Marvel comics. The Flash, an excellent example for DC Comics, because the Flash, as we know him, Barry Allen, is introduced. So we get introduced to the Red Flash that we all know. He becomes a superhero right up there with Wonder Woman, with Batman, with Superman, and DC really has like a brand new hero that everybody's really getting behind. So the Flash is fantastic, obviously one of the most historic characters in DC Comics. And that's what happens, is that he really elevates to the level that those other superheroes are. That really kind of like godlike status and popularity. The fastest man alive, it happened pretty quick, no pun intended. But one of the best things about the Flash is that it does have the history rooted in the Golden Age. So in the Golden Age, there was the Justice Society of America. And it was made up of a few different Golden Age style, what you'll recognize later as versions of the modern characters that we know. They existed on a different universe, on a different planet. I believe it is Earth 1. We'll see. But Earth 1 is where those superheroes are. So later on, when they move away from those heroes, they don't want to just forget them, because just like today, they still have fans. They have fans that have grown up like, oh, we don't want you to just destroy the JSA. We don't want to just lose all these characters. Hawkman. So what they end up doing is making sure that those characters do exist in a different reality. And I believe some of the ways that they do it, it's almost as if in the Silver Age, the DC heroes that we have, some of them like recognize those heroes as like they were their comic book heroes. Like that's some of it. And they have to, you know, move some stuff around because of Batman and stuff. Some characters did stay true, but other characters do get retconned and recast. And you've got different characters playing the old roles. You've got different characters playing the old roles. You've got Alan Scott, Green Lantern from the Golden Age, very old-timey, big cape, all right, carries that Green Lantern around. But then later on, Green Lantern is redesigned by Carmine Infantino, a big guy at DC who's really responsible for this new age of heroes in the Silver Age. I, lucky enough, got to attend that school I went to, the School of Visual Arts. I told you about that, right, in New York City. Carmine Infantino was one of my teachers. I got to get taught by the guy who created The Flash. What? That's amazing. That school has a lot of great people that taught there. That's why it was really known for its comics program. Will Eisner taught there. So some of these comic greats that I've talked about, they're there. They worked and built that school. So that's why that school really cared about comics and cartooning in a time when it was always like ridiculed, as we'll talk about. But this is a time where comics are on the rise again. They found a new generation, a new audience, and they do have to adapt. They found it's a new generation and a new audience, but they have found a way to adapt to everything. But things do change. But right now we're just celebrating the new sleek look of the Green Lantern. An alien crashes down from outer space to an Air Force pilot, finds this ring. What is this ring? And then boom, he just kind of knows what to do, and it seeks out the Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, because his strength of will is a thing that's really important to being a Green Lantern. Usually the ring is chosen. The ring is it chooses a person. It goes planet to planet, and it's just, oh, on this planet, you are one of the greatest. But in this situation, I believe because of this accident, it was like, you, Hal Jordan, have to do this. So he struggles with fear, and he struggles with willpower, and he struggles with all this because he's not as good as the rest of the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps. That's a big thing that really starts to pop because of sci-fi and us being obsessed with space, because that's where we are. We're starting to go from the mid-50s all the way to the 60s is where we're heading. And that's when the space race really begins. So you've got a few historic things going on. You've got the Cold War is an issue that we're dealing with. So problems with Russia. It's the atomic age. Everyone excited, everyone terrified because of what has occurred. The atomic bomb. Nuclear bombs have gone off at this point. That's now only like, oh, look at that. That happened about a decade ago. See how I was talking about 9/11? It's like, oh, that was 20 years ago. And right now we're going through a pandemic. And you're like, oh, wow, it's been 7 months, right? And in a while, it's going to be like, remember that thing? That was a huge historic event that I lived through. That's important. This is a pinnacle moment in history, just like those were pinnacle moments in history. And comics reflect this. Comics, the endless story. That's what comics are, especially what books did I talk about? Action comics, detective comics, and I believe Wonder Woman. Pretty much in publication nonstop since their inception. Wonder Woman came out in a different book, But I'll look it up and figure out exactly how long Wonder Woman's been around, because I do know Detective and Action Comics have made it to that 1,000 mark and now passed it by a couple of years, which is just, again, pretty historic. That's how long these characters have existed. They are telling stories every single week nonstop. You saw me in the last video relate things to wrestling. Professional wrestling has kind of done the same thing, because I love it. I love Monday Night Raw, right? There's Batman, but also I've got all these things that have to do with wrestling, tattoos, things like that. I was gonna wear my Macho Man shirt because the last video, but decided to go with this Batman because we're gonna talk about him. But yeah, wrestling's been telling a story every single week. So every single week, they're just kind of hip to a trend. The most recent one a few years ago was when Pokemon Go went nuts. Just randomly one day, a wrestler's going, he's just doing this on his phone, and then he leaves. That's all they did, but now it's like, oh, there's a marker in history. There's a marker in history. Remember I brought up those fidget spinners? That's a thing to talk about. Things that go viral and become a part of the entire market of the world. Remember I was talking about that in the video, in the last video? That's important. When 70 million people are reading something, your product, 90% of kids are reading your product and looking at your product, that's going to affect a generation. Then there's a dip because of some things that happen, and now they're kind of on the rise again, but also being taken in a way seriously, but in a way tongue-in-cheek by the adults. And let's talk about that, because we are talking about art. So I talked about Carmine Infantino really affecting the art of the universe of the DC Comics. It really does streamline it, and it's very animated, and Carmine Infantino just so known for his storytelling, all right? Just fascinating. So what happens is in the 60s, there's obviously this movement we all know about, and it's called pop art, right? So pop art takes a huge bit of style and design from comics. That's what happens. And it becomes kind of this thing that everyone's like, pop art is looked at as trash, right? And comics also looked at as trash, literal trash. That's why they're worth something now. You didn't used to buy comic books and just constantly keep them and collect them. You'd pass them around and you'd trade with your friends. So your dime goes a lot further because you pass that comic around and you got a bunch of other books that you're passing around. So you're reading a lot of comics for a dime. And that's how you do it. It's about trading. That's trading cards. Pick that up later, and trading cards become a big thing. Like baseball cards, obviously. And that's why those things have value. Because at one point, they were treated as total garbage. You traded them out. You put them in your bike, right? Comics, same thing. You rolled them up in your pocket. It's a magazine. How many magazines are you taking care of? Not really much anymore, but that's the point, is that all of that stuff is this evolution of this constant shrinking of what we all experience together. I was talking about that in the last video. So that's a big occurrence to keep in mind as you think about the popularity of a generation growing up with comics, with superheroes. Batman has now raised a generation. Superman's raised a generation, right? So now that generation's grown up, and I've been doing research on the pop art thing, so some of it is like, they do like it, but also, since the point of some pop art, bananas, soup cans, things like that, Brillo, right? It's to say, oh, see this trash, see this common everyday trash. There is the idea that there's like, put beauty in it, right? This is beautiful in a way. But also, in that definition, they are calling comics trash. They're right there. So what they're trying to do, and it's Roy Lichtenstein, obviously, the two names, the Batman and Superman of this whole thing is obviously Andy Warhol and Lichtenstein, right? They are just doing a thing called lifting later on. That becomes a thing. Where they are just taking panels. They haven't created this art, right? Did he create the Campbell Soup label? No, he didn't, but he put it in a different light. And one of the things that he does is he puts Superman in a display on Fifth Avenue, right? So Fifth Avenue fashion, there it is. It's Fifth Avenue, New York. And there's a poster of Superman, a panel taken from a comic that's now been used and repurposed in this way. Fascinating, right? I'm going to actually have you do a project similar to this coming up. Because that's what this is all about. It's about repurposing and reusing your character in different ways, trending with the times. And pop art was a real big trend that had a big impact. And the other thing that it did was if you think of it like this, that's the way adults looked at comics, right? Oh, our view of it is like this. It's kind of for kids and we get the joke, right? That is what infers when they create this man, Batman. The one man, Adam West, my man, my Batman for sure. Adam Wee, there he is. So Adam West is my favorite. I love this Batman. This is the Batman that makes me love comics. This is the Batman that makes a generation love comics, but it's also the Batman that has a big negative impact on comics, because from this point on, a lot of non-comic people, right? They're just like, oh, biff, bam, comics, right? Pow, zap, comics, that's comics. It's zip, zap, pow. It's not just that, right? And history makes fools of a lot of these things, where you look back with those rose-colored glasses and we take out this little bit of what it is. I talk about it with Elvis, what Elvis becomes when we just take it down at the core, right? This is exactly what happens when you look and strip down, like, up, what was Batman? What was Star Trek? These really brightly colored shows based on that stuff, shooting it at an angle so that it feels like a comic. That's what they were attempting with the cinematography. Batman was literally designed to feel like this overly lit, like when you hit that contrast all the way up, right? And overly done, overly dramatic thing there where they are laughing, and it's called camp. That goes right hand in hand with the whole thing that pop art's about, where they're kind of like, this is art, right? Didn't we recently have a banana get nailed to a wall and some of the millionaires like, oh, I'll buy that banana. Now I've declared that it's art. Now it's worth this much. And now look at me, I'm going to eat it. And oh, now it's performance art, right? How's that make you feel, right? In a way, infuriating. In another way, it's Duchamp, right? It's that sort of thing where you're trying to be like, this is art. And because you have sway or something to say, or you stand for something, or you represent something, and you can influence things, you now have. And that's what pop art was doing at its point, an opinion of comics. So it does treat it like it's garbage, but that is what it is at the time, and they were raised to think that. So he is giving it a compliment. It is a compliment. As I've done a lot more about it, a couple weeks ago I was really mad about it. I did think it was more of a knock on comics, but it's not. It is the style of the times, where comics are looked at as, if it's not kids, it's camp for adults at least, right? And again, adults now, we see how we are. Some adults have now grown up with cartoons, and now you're used to, oh, I watch anime, adults watch anime, adults read comics. Back when I was growing up, my dad's like, adults don't play video games, because video games were just getting invented. So of course, you're right, they don't. They hadn't had a chance. Now video games are for all ages, and that's what it is. And everything grows just like that. So comics grow in the Silver Age. Now capture a couple of fan bases. And that's the point, because you're always trying to get that Venn diagram of statistics. Oh, this many boys and this many girls and this many from the age to that and this many from age this to that. And that's what I'm telling you about these numbers. When it is such a huge percent of what this is it tells you a lot. It just tells you a lot and infers a lot about the times and what was going on. Batman was huge, all right? Oh, this TV Guide cover of Batman. See this? This is a Roy Lichtenstein. He did that. And TV Guide, oh, what is that, a magazine? Yeah, it doesn't matter. How many people got TV Guide? Almost everybody at the time. That's what counts. If you're on the cover of something, when there's not 3 million things to be on the cover of, there's this many things, right? That counts. That means something. It tells you how much of the stratosphere Batman had elevated to. And Batman is phenomenal. So let me just talk a little bit about Batman for a while, because I did want to spend more time on him. I touched a little bit on Bill Finger in the last one. Bill Finger is responsible for all of those things that I said, and he does kind of silently fall onto the wayside. This happens to some creators that later do get some get resolved and some get that hero treatment that they later get. We're going to talk about that in a moment, because there's another artist that goes on right now in the Silver Age, and another. When we get to Marvel, it's just had it. When we get to Marvel, it's Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko has as much to contribute to the creation of Spider-Man as Stan Lee, as does Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby is one of the biggest influences on all of this because of his art. His art style changes everything, okay? And that does start in this era, and that's going to be in the next video with Marvel Comics, because he really does it over there at Marvel before, and a little bit at DC before, because there's always a little bit, and I'll show you those examples, because Jack Kirby's a titan. He's the king. That's the point. You got Stan the Man, and you got Jack King Kirby. And those two together, imagine it. Imagine it. And that's why partnership is how you got to try and work together. There is this weird thing, I'm not going to go too far into it, where some people, troll-like fans, I'll be honest with you, I find them to be more trollish. They're like, Stan Lee, I prefer Jack Kirby. You prefer? They're different jobs. They're different things. It's a different world altogether, And there was a time where there was some bad blood between those two, but then there's a time where they've resolved it because people grow up, and then people grow old, and then you grow older, right? And that changes everything. And I've watched it happen, and again, in the wrestling industry and lots of industries. Old debts are settled. Old things is water under the bridge. People change and people grow. And that's just also my advice to you. Because again, when I was going to school at your age, wide-eyed, the exact same experience, right? Here we are talking about art school, getting ready to go. And you've got a unique experience, but you still have what you came here for. And that's the wide-eyed wonder of following a pursuit for art and making it a career or at least a passion and wanting to know all about it, right? You are going to get knocked out. You're going to get knocked down. It's a drag-out fight. Making it a career, I've given you warnings. If you do it as a career, you might grow to hate it. Okay, and that's what a lot of this is, to make it an art. I said this the other day in a I think it was when we were hanging out. If I can scare you away from doing this, if I can, anything I talk about ever with this effort and the laws and the copyrights and creator rights and all the stuff I'm ever saying and all the work I'm kind of saying, this goes for any art career. Okay, dig your heels in and get ready to work. You got to work harder than you ever have, and then when you think you did hard, you're going to grow up and be like, wow, I wasn't working hard, because you're still growing up past this. 25 is a big thing. You're all developing, all right, till 25. And then 30s, things change. And then you get into 40. That's, like I was saying, that's when Jim Davis hit his stride. That's when Stan Lee hits his stride, all right? I'll talk about that in the next video too. He was already in the comics industry for 20 years before coming up with the Fantastic Four. Get ready for that, because that's in the next video. But right now, again, hanging out with Batman. Okay, Batman does change, and he changes a lot. And by this time, Batman is right there with Superman, and he's right there with all of the things happening. A lot because of this. Mainstream popularity means merchandising, the concept of toys, the concept of all that stuff. The kids, I'm wearing a shirt, I'm wearing a hat. I even said, oh, wouldn't it be funny if, and I'm not lying to you, I happen to be wearing my Batman boxer shorts because it was laundry day. And these are the last ones I put on because they're childish, so I saved them for last. But that said, we'll see if I don't edit that out. I don't know. That's the whole thing, and that's what changes Batman too. For the better, and like I was saying, for the worse. Because all those comic sales, they go up, sure. But also, they plummet once it's done. And it doesn't help, but it certainly changes the mainstream's opinion of comics. And it's that comics are silly. So that is important. So I told you all a little bit about the comics code in the last one. Let me make sure that I did cover that, because I've been trying to keep track of everything. Yes, all the rules, all that stuff. Yes. So in the last video, I talked about the Comics Code Authority and how comics were already being wiped out and what they did to those horror comics. And basically it changed a lot, and comics got a bit sillier. And I was talking about the domestic era of comics, all right, where we've got to have Lois Lane hanging out. We've got to have Jimmy Olsen having comics, things like that. And these adventures become more just over the top and not as, certainly the serious tone is not there yet, because again, it's this constant cycle of kid to adult, kid to adult. And by every bounce, you're hoping to kind of keep an amount, and that's everything. That's a lot of industry. It's a lot, because about every 15 years is a new generation. Let's bring My Little Pony back. There it is. So that is how a lot of this works. So you've got all this stuff going on over at DC. Batman and his entire Rogues Gallery being some of those popular things, but so merchandisable, okay? And coming up with these creators, and a lot of also some of the Batman, the first black and white movies where Batman was the first character there, and as well as that, one of the biggest television stars is Batman. And around this time also we've seen George Reeves be Superman. No relation to Christopher Reeves, just a happy coincidence. But he's played Superman so popular that it's on I Love Lucy, the #1 show in America that everybody, millions of people are watching. Because again, television has now occurred. Television changes everything. And much like the radio inferred before a lot about Superman and the cast of characters and some of the things that happens there, it also now changes from that to television. So it starts over again and the pattern repeats. So now they add some stuff, which of course changes the comics, because now we got to follow kind of what's going on in the Batman universe. All right. This is again when like Batman is getting, chased around by oversized, ridiculous things. And they're really over the top stories and over-the-top costumes, lots of precarious situations, and some of the funniest covers ever. Some of the funniest comic covers ever. All right, World's Finest is the joy of having Batman and Superman together in one book, right? That's what they call the World's Finest, okay? And it's so good, but man, do they just have so many ridiculous antics on all these comic covers. I'll put a bunch up. I can't wait. You can spend hours on it. It's so ridiculous. So I feel like I've rambled a bit about Batman. You can see the importance of Batman. I think I'll just stop it there. Where I'll talk about the Joker later on. The Joker maybe has more of an impact because yeah, the Joker comes out, and I talk about the Joker, the opposite of Batman. He's the laughing man, right? So again, he's this psychotic clown, which is always a terror, right? And again, clowns very popular back then. That's the point. Clowns, we've lost that concept of clowns, but clowns back in the day, very popular. So the idea of the evil clown, yikes, all right? Especially one that evil. And we'll save the Joker for a little later because he really takes the stage a bit more when things get more violent in the 90s. So I talked about all of that stuff. That's great. That's all happening there. And media dictates, sales down, all that stuff. That's all Marvel. Marvel, 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 Marvel stuff. All that stuff's Marvel, 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 Marvel. Boop-a-da-boop, boop-a-da-boop, boop. Green Lantern, talked about that. That's later. Oh, I only got to go to here. So that looks like that is the DC side of the Silver Age. I'll see if there's any other things that I missed, but I do feel like that's a bit of what you need to know. So again, these characters do evolve. They get a bunch of a slick design, a lot of them redesigned to go with the modern age, the spaceman, sci-fi, all of that. The atomic age, fear, being a big thing that infers characters now and motivations. The world is getting a little, right? Because again, Americans feel like any day we could just explode, right? And that was a very real fear as we go through the 60s. But also as we head into the 60s, you see a lot of that Batman stuff I was talking about, perhaps. We're getting to the hippies, okay? So hippies have happened, right? And we're still a little while away from Vietnam, but we are headed toward, as we go toward that space race, right? So JFK has announced the space race is happening, okay? But then something's gonna happen, obviously. And just like I was talking about, one of those monumental moments in history, everybody remembers where they were when they found out the president was shot, when JFK was shot. Camelot's done. That is a big deal. That's as big a deal as it gets. So it changes a nation and has a big ripple on what happens in comics and throughout comics. So, and again, just the mood of the nation itself. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on as we go from this kind of adorable world of convenience of the 50s, the wholesomeness that they're really going for and still have, the concept that dancing is still, oh my goodness, that man's moving his hips too much, as I was talking to you about. So ridiculous as Elvis is he's got the devil in him, right? So that is ridiculous. So we get from that time as then we get to that backlash of that hippies and less suits, more freedom, more creativity, art having a big impact. And again, the things I said about the art movements and how comics changed the way people grew up. So when things happen and you watch all the time, people come up with some of the same jokes, right? Because a whole generation's watching some of the same thing. Because I'll tell you what, if you're ever hanging out with someone and they're like, oh, I've just got to pick up the phone. I just got to call someone. Oh, who are you going to call? Ruined forever. You can't say who you're going to call. Forever. It's just part of the cultural zeitgeist and continuing very well, right? That happens. Things happen like that, all right? Words change, the times change, and comics keep up with the times. So this huge dip in the way comics work because of the comics code, because of those rules, because of the nonsense, and then it going back to kids, that's a big thing that changes comics. But we're headed toward the Bronze Age, and that's when it's time to take a look at that comics code again, because superheroes really mean something to a lot of people. And we're going to talk about that because we just experienced a whole bit of proof that superheroes mean to lots of people with we just experienced that with the death of Chadwick Boseman, which is the saddest thing that's happened. But people said and felt that because he was the Black Panther. That's exactly why. That character was a hero to an entire community for real. And it's just a shame. And I'm going to talk about that in the next videos. We talk about Marvel, probably in the Bronze Ages. We talk about Marvel when they take things a little more mature, and so does DC. But right now, things are squeaky clean. It's the suburbs, it's the atomic age, science, and the future. It's all going to be grand. We'll figure it out so long as we don't blow up. So that's the whole thing going on. Comics are just amazing. I love them the most. They're affecting art. They're changing the times and changing with the times. Excelsior! We're not there yet, but we're there next. We got Heroes with Problems in a minute. It's the Marvel Universe, the Marvel Age. It's my favorite.